So in about 4 minutes and 30 seconds, I make some comments on the first video, and I need some clarification. I realize there's a whole lot there that can be said, and even now I'm not going to say all of what can be said on the subject, but it's really to do with the division between Christian natural philosophy and atheistic science, and how these schools of thought are so different that they're incompatible. But there's some history that we need to go through first to understand why we are where we are right now. And, we cut into human history at Christian ascent. I'm not going to worry about previous. So the thing cut out anyway. I'm trying to do my best with what's here. So we begin with Christian ascent. We know that there was a period of time when Christianity developed, and it had a victory, and through its early history, it had many great thinkers and fathers of the church, doctors of the church, in fact, did a lot of work in ontology and cosmology, and answered, this was a period of time where the Trinity was defined in the church, and when, say, Basil was, writing the Hexameron or preaching the Hexameron, which was then recorded down, and where St. Gregory was musing on things such as the making of man, and there was a great deal of very thorough philosophical work done during that time. And then there was a period of time that emerged from that we had Christian rule, from the late Roman Empire through the Middle Ages. You have a period of time based on this ontological and cosmological work that was done, and of course on the Holy Spirit and on Christ. Like, I'm a faithful Catholic. I'm not trying to do merely an anthropological assessment. And so we see the difference in these two ways of understanding is that in the Christian cosmology, we have a strongly metaphysical understanding of the being, and that is a spiritual understanding. And we have in the secularization and the transfer of institutions to a physical and a material understanding, such that if we want to participate in the institutions which Christianity built, such as the university system was built by Christianity, it wasn't built by any other peoples. The contemporary university system has inherited its institutions from its Christian predecessors. So then you got the situation where, okay, there's this transfer of institutions, so how are we going to stay in here? It's the unseating of Christianity, and the way we're going to stay in here after this unseating is we're going to compromise dogma. Through compromised dogma, we participate in a material metaphysic, because it's denying metaphysics, so therefore it's undergirding its substance is material, which fundamentally means its metaphysical reality is material, but that's a more complex accusation. Metaphysical versus the metaphysical or spiritual cosmology that we not only used to hold, but must necessarily still hold as Christians in order to be faithful Christians. And this is a big problem that we've had for a couple of centuries now, in a decline in this. Some very strong teaching from some 19th century popes and early 20th century popes in warning us from this, but the church has now officially actually turned itself entirely over to this physical material. And we will discuss later those implications. But how have we participated through the transfer of institutions and the unseating of Christianity? By compromising dogma, and by no other way. So that's enough by way of historical introduction to the place we are. Now let's have a good look at a visual presentation that I make in discussing these notions of material, physical, metaphysical, metamaterial. Just a visual way to have a conversation about these things, because they are seemingly, in fact, they are the definition of abstract. But the nature of this abstraction is what is so important to us. So we will continue this review, or this addendum to Lesson 1 in Metaphysical Cosmology in a moment. There are a few ways that being is said to have come to us. By one account, God brought it into being, and that is the account that we stand by, and it's the account we will be defending. But it is a long-standing account by, even by many accounts, as it were. But another way in which the world may have come into being is spontaneously. That it just came into being in all of its myriad parts. It just did. And there is no reason why heading towards, and there's no purpose heading from. There is nothing coming or going that is sensible about it. Whereas under the cosmos and ontology rooted in the substance of God, then we have quite something different. We have purpose coming and going. There was a purpose in it, and it leads to a purpose. In other words, there was an intelligence behind it, and there is wisdom in its ultimate destiny. So these are two very different ways of looking at the world, obviously. And our question is going to be, in what way are these incompatible in terms of their ability to describe the world? At what point do they diverge in something like science? And is one idea better than the other at conforming to our observations of the world, which is scientifically? That's a question. That's a principal question that we will be asking. There is another way, and that is perpetual. That the world just is and is and is, and there is no reason for it to start, and it never did start. It's always been there, and that there was a further addendum to this belief, and that was that it was called the steady state theory, that things just are as they are, and they remain kind of constant in the cosmos. Again, they're similar in the sense that the causes of both of these is nothing. Just being itself causes itself, whereas this is the cause. And so we will not really be looking at this. Mostly it's this one, but I suppose as both. No, we will. We'll look at all of them. Because in a sense, these are compatible, and they're kind of they have a familial relationship, whereas these are in opposition. In fact, at war with each other. There is no peace between theism and atheism, and they are so incompatible that they can hardly really make serious claims about the world with the same language. So all cosmological systems begin with the void. And we begin, the visual representation of the void is this dark color. It's not quite black. I don't know why I wouldn't do it just black. Anyway, it's not quite black. It's a deep blue, Prussian blue with Payne's gray. And in this void is nothing. It's truly nothing. And from the Christian perspective, creation is out of the void, ex nihilo. It's out of nothing. It's the void equals nothing, and that's true in all of the cosmologies. That we begin with nothing. Now, of course, I'm already going to have to say the perpetual view, in a sense, nothing never exists, but we know that nothing is the negation of all that is, so nothing exists, at least metaphysically or conceptually. That's not a major point, but it just needs to be stated. So we begin with the void from the theistic and from the atheistic Big Bang cosmology. We have a beginning with nothing, and then something emerges from nothing. So what can be the cause of nothing becoming something? That's our first sort of puzzle that we have. Well, in a sense, in Christian natural philosophy, when we talk about there being nothing before creation, or that God exists prior to. So this is only a material conversation, and since God will come in later, shall we say, or not God in the case. But in this case we're talking about it, there was a void of material being. There was no existence, material existence in being. That's what we mean by the void. And out of nothing, that God out of nothing, because God out of nothing, God precedes nothing in that very sentence. So we know we begin with God, whereas here we begin with nothing, absolutely nothing, no prior being whatsoever. In both of those systems, because even in the perpetualist system, the continual presentation of being into time and space is against its void. So there is still always, and if there is no cause for it becoming outside of itself, well, then it is, in both cases, in some ways self-caused, but we'll have to engage various ways in which that is attempted to be explained as we move along. So we start with a void, nothing, absolutely nothing. Materially does not exist, and then in that void we place matter. Now matter is, in this case, is the sum total of all physical phenomenon, whether that be material, as matter more or less describes, or it be motion. Motion is material, but it's not material in the same sense that a brick of gold is a brick of gold. A brick of gold flying through the air is in two different modes. One is being just in the mode of itself as matter, another it is engaged in a dynamic state and rate change within the material whole, within the void. So this is all aspects of matter. I mean, I think we have to, at this point, assume, no, maybe not. We won't yet assume time and space. We'll have to carry that conversation on. But what we're here is positing matter and all of its rules of engagement, everything about it, all its energies, whatever it is, as far as we know, its structure, such as when we look at the periodic table, we see a rational structure of being. All of those aspects of matter is what we're talking about here, and that is a given. We all accept that on both Christian and non-Christian, and both atheistic. Everybody accepts, maybe not, as we'll discuss in a minute, the underlying conditions of being or of matter, but we accept that matter in this conversation is present, it is permanent in terms of our relationship to it. It's consistent and constant in its being. The objects that we're familiar with us in our lives continue to be with us and do not engage in random transformation, but are stable in their being. We know quite a bit about the material world in terms of just our own natural communication with it. But we have to ask a question of whether or not this matter has substance. And by that we mean, does it have an existence prior to itself that is, as it were, the effect, the affect, the cause of matter and physics and all of being such as we understand it? Is there something substantial that it's upon? And we generally understand that kind of substance as something to do with metaphysics. Like it is not the physics themselves, but a parallel being. Now this term has many meanings and uses, some misuses, and we just want to realize, though, that when we're talking about this is in the kind of classical philosophical sense we're using the terms, that the substance, which is the understanding, basically, is what we have here. It's the thing it's built on. Conceptually, we could almost call it the scaffold, the substructure, the superstructure. So does matter have something underlying it, or does it, as it were, somehow underlie itself? So this is the question that we are posed with, and this is the problem with the atheistic view, is that matter has no substance, and yet matter, or at least has no purposeful or intelligent substance, and yet matter is organized as if intelligently. I mean, as I said before, look at the periodic table and say that looks like the result of just random and spontaneous becoming. It doesn't. It looks like an ordered principle, a concept sheet, variations on a theme, leading somehow to the being of so many different elements and things. I mean, it's a remarkable, it's like seeing the code source for being is what it's like when you're looking at this stuff. And yet we continually, it's not just that gold and silver and mud and rocks and all this stuff just popped into being, but the very principles of their being, the substantial principles of their being, popped into being. So this is a very, very different view. And then we have another aspect. I mean, these views are fundamentally incompatible. And then we have another aspect to this, where we have what are claimed to be sort of emergent properties, sometimes they're referred to. We have emergence, that from matter in physics, we don't necessarily just have an input metaphysic, but we have an output metaphysic. We have an emergence. And this is what, in philosophy of mind, at least in the 90s, I'm sure they're still talking about it in these terms, at least somewhere, that consciousness is an emergent property. I mean, effectively what they're saying, the soul is an emergent property of matter that when matter becomes, in physics, when matter becomes complex enough in its relationships, i.e. a human brain, from that processing emerges a conscious person. Now, there's pessimistic forms of science that say we aren't really as conscious as we think we are, and all these reductionist sorts of things, but most people, unless that aren't deranged, don't believe that's true. We believe that we are a person, a conscious person, and that we do have this property. But the question from, I may have put this emergence here, this would be, the mind or the soul, we might say. But from a Christian perspective, actually we would place the soul as substantial to our being. That it doesn't, matter is not primary, matter is secondary. The substance of our being as a soul, our ensoulment. Yes, we see that we have a contradiction here already, our first major contradiction, and that is the contradiction between ensoulment and consciousness, in terms of a very different understanding of. I'm not going to go into great detail on this right now because it's reminding me, seeing this binary here is reminding how much I actually need to do some real revisiting of some texts and stuff, not of my own, but of others, to have a better understanding of this, the doctrine of ensoulment. Because we know the body of the matter, as it were, the physics, were dealt with first, and then, well, it's actually combined. God formed man out of the dust, from the dust of the ground, or the slime of the earth, and breathed in his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. In terms of it seems simultaneous. So therefore we have ensoulment is part of the substantial being of the material thing. It's the metaphysical reality underlying the material being. That is the Christian dogma, and that's clear in that understanding of Genesis 3 there. No, not 3, 2. And whereas when we are looking at an evolutionary point of view, we have matter is prior, matter is evolving through physical processes, matter is becoming ever increasingly complex. Consciousness, first of all, just rough awareness of being, such as maybe even a plant has, some sense of being, perhaps, in the vegetative soul. We certainly understand that animals have a sense of being. They have even certain aspects of personality and such that we know about them when we've had them as pets and such. But we do not, some people do, but that's more of a folk kind of thing. People do not, nobody really academically applies consciousness to animals equal to human consciousness. They may denigrate human consciousness and say it's not all it's cracked up to be, but they still know it's more complex than animal consciousness because, well, they don't build complex societies the way we do. But this here, consciousness from that process of evolution is an emergent property. It's an emergence. It's post facto of becoming, of matter out of the void. And it is an accidental, there was no need for it to happen, no cause for it to happen, and no purpose for it in happening. I mean, occasionally you'll get atheists getting romantic, a little bit of kind of spiritual nostalgia, and they'll say something like, the universe seems as if it was designed in order to be contemplated. And Christian cosmology would say yes, indeed. And by contemplated, we mean adored and worshipped. But not the thing itself, the substance of the thing, which is, from the Christian perspective, God. And from the traditional Christian perspective, this is a hard truth, not sort of not an accidental, sort of messy. God sort of made material principles, maybe, but then allowed them just simply to evolve, such that we actually are in this kind of condition here, where we're just having consciousness as being an emergent property rather than true ensoulment. Though sometimes people in theistic evolutionary schemas try to say that God jumps in and starts ensouling us at a certain point, which is just such a messy kind of cosmology. Anyway, that's getting a bit bedraggled, my commentary here. So that's all for now on this aspect. I just wanted to make it as clear as I could about what we're talking about, because when we go through, in terms of metaphysics and physics and matter, like this is, I hope, a clearer understanding of the conversation, and we can return to this visual diagram, as it were. Well, it is a visual diagram. This visual diagram as a means of having a conversation about which view looks at these things differently, and we've done this through already through ensoulment and consciousness. But let's return to the video. This looks like a bunch more work that needs to be done here for this to be fleshed out better, and we'll leave it at that for